Jay Carpenter, moderator of the Phoneword Forum. Today is Wednesday, April the 25th, 2012. It's approximately 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and today we're going to be talking about web RTC, or web real-time communications, and toll-free data, and how the two might interplay with one another in the future. So I am going to send out a tweet right now. All right. Tweet just went out. Whoops. And if you're listening to this on the recording, just bear with us for a moment. All right. Hello.
Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Jay. How are you?
I'm well. Welcome.
Say, before we get started, before anyone else joins, do you know anything about the technical advisory board that happened on Monday?
No.
Warren Bent.
Hello, Warren. This is Jay. Welcome. I'm well.
Thanks.
Welcome. We have Tom Ogle from MBZ Communications on the line as well. So.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
What, Warren, Tom and I were just going to talk a little bit about the Technical Advisory Council of the FCC. I guess they met on Monday. What was that meeting about, Tom?
Well, primarily it was for first responder interoperability, but I mean, obviously it all relates to broadband plan and broadband initiative, which ultimately affects toll-free in some way, shape, or form. I basically was able to pull up the agenda, went into the past events section of the FCC, pulled up the video, and it's only playing like 20 seconds, and then it bounces out and starts over and bounces out. And I don't exactly know what's going on with it, but I haven't seen it yet. But
this is Bill Sharp Investment.
Hi, Bill. Hi, Bill. Welcome.
Hi.
So anyway, I guess I don't really have anything to report. I just wanted to know if you had heard anything about it, maybe from Rich Shockey or something. But
no, I haven't talked to Rich Shockey in a while, and frankly, I haven't been following what's going on with the CISRIC or the TAC. I'm pretty much in the camp that the PSTN is there's a lot of vectors in the direction of shutting it down as soon as possible, and they'll work out something on the 911 as well as any other speed bumps that are along the way. So I'm focused on more other things, which brings us to the topic today. Before we get started, is there anything anyone would like to discuss today besides WebRTC and toll-free data, etc.?
Not here. This is Bill Sharp again. I have nothing. I just like to listen to the conversation today.
Okay, great. Well, Warren, how familiar with you are with WebRTC?
Sorry, I had myself on mute. I'm not directly involved, but I'm following fairly closely from afar for a number of reasons, one of which is I'm part of a lab advisory board at the Illinois Institute of Technology for a real-time communications lab that exists there. It's a educational as well as research lab, and one of the things that the lab does on an annual basis is host a conference. And as part of my advisory board role, I am chairing 3 separate tracks in the conference, and one of them is a Web and Emerging Technologies track, which is not going to focus strictly on WebRTC, but it's going to be fairly heavily focused on that topic. So that's my primary level of interest in participating today.
Okay, great. And when will that conference be held, just out of curiosity?
It's September 10 through 12 in Chicago at IIT's main campus, which is just south of the Loop. So that's a Monday through Friday. Or, excuse me, Monday through Wednesday, I'm sorry.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let me talk a little bit about WebRTC. I'm by no means an expert in it, and I am not directly involved in the initiative, but the idea, and I'll tell you how I've become acquainted with it. There's a vendor that I use, which is called Voxeo, and they are actively involved in moving WebRTC forward through the Internet Engineering Task Force, and they are working on some initial phases of how it works, developer side initiatives, and so forth. And I would highly recommend that anybody listening to this call Google Voxeo Labs and WebRTC. There's a video that was released, I think, about 30, 40 days ago, right around the time of the Mobile World Conference in, I think it was Barcelona. And 2 of their people basically demoed the WebRTC, creating a call through a web browser and also doing video conferencing through a web browser. But the key is they did not involve any plugins. And, I think, in my view, that's huge. So to kind of boil it down into simple terms, it's sort of like a Skype service, only you don't need Skype. In fact, you don't need to download or join anything. You can pretty much create a Skype-like experience, both audio as well as video, directly through a web browser, which means that what this new initiative is ushering in my view, is a full telephony experience through any web browser, as well as video conferencing. And I think that's definitely revolutionary. So the other part that we're talking about today is toll-free data. And I think over the last year or two, we've seen a rising concern, both in the press as well as among the public, for what is the data consumption and what's happening with the data plans. And a couple months ago, we had Martin Geddes on the PhoneWord Forum, and he spoke of some technical issues surrounding toll-free data and sender pays and so forth. And I would encourage anybody to listen to that. And hopefully within the next, couple months, I'll have these PhoneWord forums up on YouTube so they're easier to listen to, along with adding some visuals to them. But basically, Martin opened up or enlightened me in terms of some of the technological issues around toll-free data. So the bottom line is, I think we're at the juncture of a couple key things. Number one is just a total wide opening of the merger of telephony and the web experience. And number two is, I think we're on the brink of seeing some sort of toll-free access to data emerging one way or the other. And both of those, I think, are exciting opportunities for a number of us that are in this realm to usher in some new innovative services and technologies and offerings. So I'll just open it up to you guys. What do you hear out of that? I know these are kind of some probably some new concepts to some of you, and some of you are just starting to take a look at the concepts of WebRTC and toll-free data. What do you guys hear out of that? Tom, does this make sense?
Sorry there, Jay, I was on mute. I have actually not seen this video on Google. Where do we go to view that? Just through Voxeo?
Yeah, if you go to, you can go to phono.com, PHONO.com, or you can go to Tropo, TROPO.com. And if you go to their blog section, you can scroll down and see the video between Tim Panton and Chris Matthew. Chris is no longer with the company, but it's about I think a 5 or 6 minute video, and they go through a demonstration on an early prototype of WebRTC. The other resource is Ericsson has a WebRTC video, and you can just Google Ericsson and WebRTC and it'll come up. But there's a simple demonstration of WebRTC in that fashion as well. So
one other place that I would suggest people think about going to is the hookflash.com blog. It's just like it sounds, HOOKFLASH. And there, in just the last week or so, Eric Lagerway, who is a co-founder of Hookflash, did an interview with Cohen Jennings, who is the head of the WebRTC working group in the IETF. So that's about an hour-long interview, pretty informative.
Great. I've actually recently included Cullen Jennings on the distribution list for the PhoneWord forum. Haven't connected with him yet, but he's interested. He is involved in some very interesting numbering issues as well as WebRTC. So I'll
So
definitely
Jay, ultimately
take a look
what
at
you're
that.
saying is through this video conferencing through the browser, the opportunity for us is that they have no addressing scheme.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I think the ball is up in the air as to what the addressing scheme turns out to be. It could very well be conventional 1-800 numbers, assuming that they're mapped to fully qualified domain names, and it could very well be something else. So, as I've said in the past, it could very well be, I would hope that it would turn out that if you want to access Netflix in a toll-free fashion, instead of going to Netflix.com where you got to worry about your data plan usage, you would be able to go to 1-800 Netflix and watch movies through that address, and not worry, are you going to trigger a new charge on your data plan through AT&T or Verizon because you've exceeded your data usage. My other hope would be that 1-800 Netflix in the future, and I'm just using that as an example. To my knowledge, Netflix doesn't even control 1-800 Netflix, but in addition to that access being free, you could also get a premium connection. So if you're in the middle of Chicago or downtown San Francisco, you would have a couple compelling reasons to access to dial 1-800 Netflix and watch movies through that address. One is you don't have to, you've got the peace of mind about your data plan usage, but two, you might actually be able to get a premium connection. And I think both of those are strong, compelling points for both toll-free data in the future, as well as being able to access content directly through your browser. However, there's a lot of, I would say, policy friction in getting from point A to point B in that scenario. And it could very well be that Netflix would choose to offer toll-free data, should they go that way, through netflix.com/toll-free or tollfree.netflix.com. So there's no guarantee that legacy toll-free numbers will successfully transition from the legacy to the contemporary. My contention is there's an opportunity for that to happen. However, it's going to take some rather innovative thinking and innovative action for that to happen. And in our last call with Aaliyah Christofferson, it was mentioned that there's some sort of initiative to refurbish at least the web access for the SMS 800 database, and to a substantial investment, basically an 8-figure investment, and but that's a 2-year period, optimistically, for that development to happen, or at least that's what was stated on the last call. And at the pace things are happening, I think it's totally up in the air as to what will shake out during that time, and if that sort of renovation of the legacy toll-free database would happen A, successfully, and B, within time to fend off alternative addressing schemes. Does that make sense, Tom?
Jay, a little bit of a sidebar on the Aaliyah conversation last month. Have you spoken to her since that April 9th, April 10th meeting? I mean, did they come to some sort of an agreement, or is that just a stall? I mean, you speak to their $10 million investment rather, that taking 2 years or something. I mean, some of these other policy constraints relative to what's going on in that committee. I mean, if that isn't going forward, I mean, potentially that could delay things as well.
Well, the report that I got was that meeting in Chicago went well. So I haven't heard since then. And I think as Aaliyah mentioned on the call, she was headed up to a conference in San Francisco after that. But the report I've gotten so far is it was a positive meeting, and it looks like there is some cooperation that's happening in moving the SMS 800 Inc. committee or SMS 800 committee forward along with SMS 800 Inc. So does that answer your question, Tom?
Yes.
So what? Unless somebody has something else I'd like to talk about regarding, what the WebRTC and the toll-free data, what's already been discussed. Does anybody want to have some comments or thoughts along those lines? Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the conversation that I've seen on Twitter among the people that I would consider the industry experts and visionaries in the toll-free data realm. So, number one, I would say is Martin Geddes, who's been talking about toll-free data, sender pays for years, and it's my interpretation that Martin sees a good deal of value and possibility in toll-free data or sender pays. Now, in addition, right around the time of the Mobile World Conference in Spain, AT&T announced that they were going to, or one of the executives from AT&T either announced or let it slip out that they were planning a sender pays data API to unleash within the next year or so. But, counter to those two trends and developments, Martin's partner, Dean Bubley, seems to dismiss the notion of toll-free data or sender pays as unworkable. And I'd just like to talk about a couple of the considerations that I see from both points of view. Number one, I think it is probably feasible, technically feasible, and I'm encouraged by AT&T's announcement of an API to allow developers to weave in sender pays applications. But also, speaking of Cisco, Cullen Jennings, Cisco actually has some material out there that highlights at least equipment or a service they provide for toll-free data. And, you can Google that and take a look at it. It's something I've been pointing to for some time now. So I think it is technically feasible to do it. I think Dean Bubley's concern, I think, is well founded. He seems to think that, you know, it opens up all sorts of opportunity for fraud, and, you know, how do you really know if your connection is toll-free? You know, just because somebody tacks on toll-free onto their domain and says, you know, tollfree.netflix.com, and I'm just using Netflix as an example, you know, that could open up pretty much anybody to tack on toll-free somewhere in their URL and mislead people. So I think a big part of the success of toll-free data will be in the addressing mechanism and having a standardized, trusted address that people can connect with and be assured that their connection is toll-free. And that's one of the reasons that I've been, you know, excited over the, you know, last decade for toll-free telephone numbers, is because I think toll-free telephone numbers, you know, 1-800-FLOWERS has a trusted position in the marketplace in terms of, you know, that the 1-800 anything is a trusted brand. People are not concerned about malware. They're not concerned about unexpected charges showing up on their phone bill. And I think there's still time for toll-free numbering to migrate from the legacy PSTN world, or public switch telephone network world, into the contemporary Internet Protocol world, and to, you know, really leverage the trust that the public has around 1-800 numbers. So that's, you know, I think Dean Bubley is right on in terms of the opportunity for people to mislead if there isn't a trusted, unified addressing scheme to offer toll-free services. And in some way, and if Dean listens to this, you know, I apologize for interpreting his comments, but I'm just going by what I've read on Twitter, and you know, I think that is a big problem, but I think it's one that also is an opportunity, particularly for people in the toll-free industry. So I'll open it up for any comments from you folks. One other thing that I'd like to talk about in terms of the WebRTC, or Web Real-Time Communications, is that it works hand in hand with the emerging HTML5. So, you know, for those of you that might not be following what HTML5 is, it's a new and emerging standard for web coding and web building, you know, particularly on the client side. But just to explain HTML5 in as simple a terms as possible, you know, we're used to working with what's called native apps or native applications in software. So those are things that are kind of akin to like Word, Microsoft Word, or Excel, or you know, Outlook, or things like that. Those are akin to native apps or native applications. It's something that's dedicated. It's something that sits on our machine, and it's kind of, you know, confined to our machine or our smartphone device. HTML5. Well, the other side of the spectrum is, you know, we're used to working with websites, and websites are pretty much, you know, ubiquitous, totally scalable, However, we're just kind of dealing with sort of a skin that is giving us access to some sort of data and transmission that's coming from a server and being sort of painted on our screen. Well, HTML5 starts to blur those two between a browser experience and a native app experience. And from what I know about HTML5, it pretty much the vision is that there's not much of a difference between a native app and a browser application. And the other part about web real-time communications is it's built upon JavaScript. And for those of you that might not be coders or developers, JavaScript is emerging as a very powerful scripting language that's working both on the client side, like your laptop, as well as on the server side, the data server that's happening somewhere either privately or in the cloud. So I think, web real-time communications or WebRTC is leveraging upon some incredibly powerful trends in technology that are both open source, standards-based, and growing in popularity in terms of what developers around the world can do and are doing. So, Tom, I'll ask you because I know your level of technical expertise is kind of on the novice side, but does that translate to you?
Parts of it, yes. Parts of it, no.
Okay, what part connects? Or if you prefer, what part does not connect?
Well, for something to be coded, tell me again what the distinction is between something that's on my device, on my laptop, on my desktop, versus something that's on my iPad. Are you saying that there's a distinction between those two devices?
Yeah, so if it's native, let's say to your Android phone, then it's pretty much it's sitting on your Android phone. Okay? Mm-hmm. So it's like you've got to download an app. Or download something on your computer, or put a disk in your computer. That software then works very well on that device, but it only works on that device. Whereas the web is more agnostic. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're accessing a website from your computer, your wife's computer, your tablet, or your iPad, it matters somewhat on the smartphone because of the smaller screen size. But you've got a variety of ways to go to the same content. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Whereas if it's, you're using Outlook and it's on your laptop, you got to have your laptop for that to be valuable. Does that make sense?
Right.
So what's happening now in terms of the developments of HTML5 and WebRTC is all of a sudden, it used to be, that we're looking.
That technology makes Outlook, for example, that I could access that from my laptop, my wife's computer, my smartphone, my tablet.
Right.
Okay.
You could think of it like that.
So a simplistic way to think of this might be for those who in the past used sales management or client relationship management software like Act and Goldmine and things of that nature. I don't know if people are familiar with those, but they're sort of legacy products that people would buy a disk and download onto a machine and have various ways of organizing their relationships. But today, most people are using things like Salesforce.com, which is an application that resides in the cloud. You don't have to download anything onto your machine. So if you're in some other part of the globe and for whatever reason, let's say your laptop crashes and you're in a business hotel and you go to the business center of the hotel and have an internet connection, now all of a sudden your Salesforce.com is there on that computer.
Right. Absolutely. And as subtle as that
this does, of course,
Go ahead.
is from a developer perspective. I was just going to make one quick point. Is today one of the things that the platform wars are fighting over is attracting developers to develop applications to their platform. So if you are a developer, you might start with Apple or Android, obviously the two largest ones, and the two that are easiest to monetize. But there are other platforms that the proponents of those platforms would like you to develop for, RIM and the new Windows Mobile platform and so on. So if you're a developer and you want to release this application and you want it to be ubiquitous to everybody, you've got to develop 4 different applications, or not, if you use HTML5.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that clarifies it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's huge because exactly what you're talking about, Warren. Because I just went to a mobile developer conference last Saturday, and I don't develop mobile apps, but listening to all the friction and all the hair-pulling headaches these guys go through to make their native apps ubiquitous, or as ubiquitous as possible. I mean, it was just aggravating to listen to. And even within the realm of a platform like Android, apparently there's numerous different flavors and varieties of Android. So I think a lot of people have been enamored with apps, and there's hundreds of thousands of different apps out there. However, your average user only has about 30 to 40 apps on their phone, and I would say that most of those apps don't get used. That's certainly the case with me. So I think that the downloadable app on smartphones and tablets and now PCs really isn't scalable. It's not scalable the way internet domains are scalable or the way telephone numbers are scalable. And I think that's an important thing, and others might disagree, but in my view, apps do not scale. And because they do not scale across platforms, because they do not scale across applications, I think this is yet another opportunity for next generation telephone numbering to really open up some exciting value and opportunities for traditional telephone numbers to move into the contemporary, so that in conjunction with HTML5, in conjunction with WebRTC, in conjunction with toll-free data, there's all of a sudden there's a new opportunity over the next few years to leverage what's already out there and create some innovation and create some value not only in North America but worldwide for that matter. But we've kind of gone through this intermediate step of smartphone apps. However, this is Jay Carpenter's view. It's my assessment that these apps are kind of hitting the limits of their scalability, and there's a new opportunity to usher in something that's has greater scalability and functionality. And in my view, that's telephone numbering. That's Internet Protocol enabled. Warren, do you hear anything out of that? Does that resonate at all, or?
Yes and no. And again, I'm not actively involved in this, but I guess from following it from afar, I think the telephone number parts are somewhat problematic to a number of the people in this space. And again, I'll probably misspeak, so I'm going to try not to do that. But, one of the problems, I guess, with telephone numbers is for some of these types of ubiquitous applications is that an addressing scheme that is based on me. My email address is warrenbent@inchargesys.com. If I have a telephone number here at my house, that might be me that answers, or it could be my wife, or it could be one of my children. If I have a business telephone number for In Charge Systems, that could be one of a whole host of people that might pick up that phone number. It's not necessarily Warren Bent. So I think that's one of the issues that people are trying to work through in terms of this ability for ubiquitous real-time communications. I do think there's some benefits to telephone numbers too. The fact is that they are ubiquitous, and so they have a standard addressing scheme that is globally recognizable, and that certainly has some value. So I think there's two sides of that coin, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point, and I agree totally that what you touched upon is that the subscriber for a particular telephone number, be it an individual or an enterprise, so if it's your business telephone number, all of that is blurred. There is no clear, definitive source to ferret out who is the subscriber for that telephone number. And, in a legacy view, you're absolutely right. The telephone number coming to a particular house, used to be tied to that location, and the subscriber would change as easily as handing the receiver of the telephone to your, brother, sister, mother, father, aunt, uncle, whatever. So there's...
So
Go
telephone numbers are tied to devices, generally, and web-based identifiers, at least the goal is to tie them to people.
Right. And I think you have astutely touched upon the source of the inertia of telephone numbers moving from the legacy into the contemporary. Is that, telephone numbers used to be tied to a location, and they used to be tied to a device, and now the need is to tie those telephone numbers to individuals or sets of individuals. And, that identity management piece has stifled what technically could be done with telephone numbers. Enum, end user opt-in enum, has been floundering for over a decade now. and it's pretty much the authentication piece and the identity piece. But
so there's one thing that I don't know if you've read, but you might want to if you haven't. I believe it was a series of blogs that was written, I'm going to say in the fourth quarter of last year, by Tom McGarry from Newstar. So if you went to newstar.com and went to their blog, I think that you'd find, I think there was 3 or 4 blogs in the series. And you'd mentioned, at the very beginning of the call a little bit about the Technical Advisory Committee of the FCC. Tom, I don't believe, is on the cast, but the FCC did have a workshop in December of last year on the PSTN transition, and Tom was one of the speakers in that workshop, talking about the idea essentially of selling phone numbers. So I might buy a phone number.
Yeah. I don't recall him talking about selling phone numbers, but I'm certainly interested in that. So I'll review that. But that's interesting because, Warren, I don't know if you're familiar with the work that I've done in the Future Numbering Working Group and other areas, but I've been a long-time advocate for open market allocation of telephone numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, you probably want to read Tom's blog, and I think it was, and I don't mean to speak for Tom, but I think it was thrown out there as a trial balloon to see if there might be. And I think it's another issue that has two sides of the coin. It's certainly a way for service providers to maintain some level of control. At the same time, service providers have fairly large provisioning expenses and managing telephone numbers and so on that could be migrated to end users. If I owned my showed up service provider and said, "This is."
Warren, you're breaking
Warren,
up.
You kind of broke up there at the end. I didn't get the last sentence.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, you're continuing to break up, Warren. Sorry.
I'm going to try and move to another spot and see. Can you hear me any better? Or?
That sounds better. Unfortunately, you're still breaking up, Warren.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
then I must have a bad connection.
Yeah. And I'm most interested in hearing what you have to say about this. So.
Nope.
Hello? Yeah.
That seems better. Warren, are you still there?
I guess not.
I
well,
heard you. Hello, Warren. Hello. He dropped off. Hopefully, he'll dial back in on a landline. But Tom, you saw that.
Well, I watched both of those workshops. I do remember a couple of brief statements about that, but to be perfectly frank, I don't remember his specifics. So what he's referencing, is that where Tom McGarry has actually written something in a blog, or it just provides a link to that actual workshop?
Well,
because
I think Warren was...
One is 4 hours and one's 3 hours, and
Yeah.
Hopefully...
Well, I think if I interpreted Warren's comments correctly, there are some blog posts via Newstar from Tom McGarry that talks about a market-based allocation method for telephone numbering. So I'll have to do some research to look at those blogs. And for those of you that don't know, Tom McGarity, and I might be mispronouncing his name. Hello?
Hi, it's Warren. Can you hear me?
Hey, Warren. Yeah, we can hear you better now.
I'm sorry. I don't know what happened there. I could hear you fine, but you couldn't hear me.
Right. So if you could continue your comments.
I'm trying to think of where I was at. What part did you?
Well,
part did
I think you were talking about the carriers' costs of allocating and managing telephone numbers and.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the whole notion of selling phone numbers, I think, is a little bit challenging to carriers, in part because of the historic mindset that they've had, and it, at least in their view, provides some level of quote-unquote stickiness to their relationships. And so, that might not bode all that well for this whole notion. The flip side of that, though, is that it's also expensive for them to manage and provision phone numbers. So if instead of having to do all the management and provisioning, I'm sure that people on this call are, aware of how phone numbers are assigned and allocated and so on, and that's a somewhat expensive process for the carriers. If I instead owned a phone number and showed up at my carrier's doorstep and said, here, this is me, that would cut a fair amount of costs out of the carrier's budgets, too.
Exactly.
It makes them a little uncomfortable, and they think that it's that easy to go move somewhere else, though, so.
Well, I think it's very much akin to, the proposition that portability offered for the carriers. Initially, they resisted portability of telephone numbers, but then when it actually happened, they saw it as I think a positive versus a negative. So I think there's an opportunity for the same thing to happen with telephone numbers and having open market allocation. And I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, Warren, but in Australia, they did open up market-based allocation for their version of toll-free numbers. And in fact, the largest participant in that process was Telstra, the equivalent of AT&T in Australia. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that's a great point that you bring up, that it is a mindset change for the carriers. However, I think it opens up a huge amount of opportunity, as well as ushering in a new level of security and authentication via telephone numbers that have gone through an open market, process. I think that would boost telephone numbers and give them a level of trust that's higher than what an email address currently has. Mm-hmm. So
the interesting thing about what you just said, and I mentioned at the beginning of the call, the Hook Flash podcast featuring Colin Jennings. Colin spent a goodly amount of time on that podcast talking about some of the identity initiatives that are going on in the IETF and W3C. And so I don't think that there was any conclusion in the podcast. I don't think that there's been any conclusion in the standards bodies, but it appears as though what's being attempted to take place is to keep as much of the musts out of the work as possible, allowing users to make some decisions on how they authenticate themselves, and then, hoping that the ability to federate those various authentication schemes will exist. And again, I'm sort of interpreting someone else's words, so listen to it for yourself and see if that's what you gather out of it. But it appears to me as though, it's not just identity management and authentication, but, for example, signaling is another thing that the standards bodies appear to be somewhat loath to mandate, instead relying on gateways that say, sure, you can interconnect with SIP-based applications if you want, but we don't require SIP for Signal.
Right.
And I think the same thing is going on with some of the identity management schemes where, sure, there's a number of different ways that you might authenticate yourself and manage your identity, but instead of making that a part of the standard, there's an intent to try and federate a variety of different potential authentication schemes.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, it's a big issue, and I think has ramifications and impacts in a number of areas. But certainly there's an attempt to use the social networks as a type of third-party authentication. When you log in using your Facebook account or Twitter account.
Yep.
However, I think we're seeing some holes appear in those methods. So
there's two things, about this whole space, I think, that tend to be at opposite ends of the spectrum. One is how robust of an authentication scheme do you have? I was just skimming through an article earlier today that was talking about the increasing research that's taking place in different types of biometric authentication to go beyond retinal scans and fingerprints and so on to include things like your heartbeat. So you have a unique heartbeat that's very difficult to spoof, much more difficult to spoof than your fingerprint is. So,
right.
Those are obviously extraordinary robust forms of authentication that also have a negative impact on usability. That's the flip side. So when you mention things like Twitter and Facebook and so on as an authentication scheme, it's extraordinarily usable. It may not be extraordinarily robust, but it's very easy for the end user to use.
Right. Absolutely. And there's a degree of trust there, at this point at least, that's pretty high. And I would say there's a growing need for this. Ideally you've got a single sign-on, because every time we're asked to put in a username and password, that becomes a pretty large source of friction to use a service.
Absolutely. So the old cartoon that I don't know if you've seen before is, the guy standing there, and they're talking about this whole issue, and one of them says to the other, we've managed to create passwords that are very difficult for humans to remember and very easy for machines to guess.
That's
so you
funny.
can't remember your password, but I can use a machine to crack it in no time. There's some funny skits on this too. But anyway, I'll leave that alone for now. But you're exactly right, though. Passwords are broken.
Yeah, and so. All right. Well, any comments from anyone at this point? We're just about at the end of the hour. I think it's been a great conversation. I appreciate all your participation, and I think we're at the brink of some very, very exciting developments and opportunities for all of us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to listen in again this time. It's Bill Sharp, and until next time, I thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, Jay.
Okay, very good. Next month, I haven't lined anything up, but we'll take a look. If anybody has some suggestions on speakers or would like to be a special guest, please let me know, and we will get it in the queue. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Jay.